Chapter 13. Gio's Door. Requiem's words of confidence in him could not penetrate the heavy wooden door that slammed shut behind Gio. Now, as he stood alone in the intense darkness, he wasn't nearly so secure in his own abilities. Holding his breath, Gio leaned forward ever so slightly, his ear cocked to see if he could assess the situation he found himself in. Nothing. Not even the sound of air passing gently by. Tentatively, Gio began to step into the unknown. Before his sandaled foot could once again feel firm ground, however, a drop falling into a pool of water shattered the silence, its echo reverberating around him. Gio froze on the spot, his legs still suspended in mid-air. A heavy pounding made his ears throb and his chest tighten. Was this the sound of a horde of unspeakable monsters relentlessly cutting their path to Gio? Or perhaps just one giant beast that made the ground quake? Such thoughts crowded Gio's mind, stiffening his body until his heart could no longer beat. With this came the stark realization that his assailant was his own fear. With the momentary stopping of his heart, the pounding ceased. His ears throbbed no more, and his chest was released. Shaking himself loose and forcing himself to breathe, Gio was released from the grip of his fear and able to see the darkness in a new light. "Right, well, I suppose I'd better shed some light on the situation," he said, speaking aloud in an effort to comfort himself. Slipping his hand into his pocket, he pulled out another Turkish Delight. It seemed such a waste, he sighed, looking down at his favourite treat, even though he could not see it. Anyway, here it goes. Gio threw the Turkish Delight high into the air. With his hand still outstretched towards the sweet, he converted it. Like a pocket supernova, the Turkish Delight burst into light. A wave of sparkling energy chased away the shadows, leaving Gio much better equipped to see if the fears his mind had inflicted on him had some basis in truth. Looking around, he put his hands on his hips in satisfaction, thrust out his huge chest proudly, and congratulated himself. Ah, that's better. So far, Gio had every right to be confident. In front of him lay a barren landscape of grey rocks and cave wall. Not even so much as a spider seemed to have been waiting in the darkness. He heard the pounding sensation again, but dismissed it out of hand, sure his mind was causing his heart rate to go off the scale. But, as he turned to his left, Gio was forced to rethink this theory. Suddenly, he was face to face with a towering black demon. "On second thoughts, I preferred ignorance," he said, as he arched his back to stare up at the demon in both shock and awe. The demon snarled at Gio, baring his brilliant white fangs as he brought his head down to meet Gio's. The source of the pounding was all too apparent now, as every laboured breath of the demon crashed over Gio like stormy waves hitting a lighthouse. As Gio stood there, fixed to the spot, his body even more rigid than before, he could see out of the corner of his eye all manner of other beasts flitting about in the flickering light. They scampered up walls and clambered over rocks to get a better look at Gio whilst keeping a safe distance from his newfound friend. Each one was jet black as the next, making them utterly invisible in shadow and darkness. Seeing that Gio's attention was fast being stolen by these new nightmares, the towering demon released a mighty roar, arching his back and tensing his open arms in front of Gio so that his claws glinted in the light. The new nightmares did not need to be told twice and beat a hasty and panicked retreat. Some lost their bearings altogether and scampered through Gio's legs. Others leapt off the walls and onto the giant flying bugs that were cutting a swathe through the cavern as they sought to escape. One such bug was knocked so badly off course by its unwelcome rider that it almost crashed into Gio's head, but an angry swat from the towering demon saved Gio from decapitation. The chaotic exodus took mere seconds, and soon the towering demon had Gio's full attention once again. "Impressive that something so big and snarling can move around so quietly in the darkness," Gio said to the demon, trying to keep his mettle. The demon continued to batter Gio with his heavy breath, but did nothing more as his black, featureless eyes bored into Gio. Gio almost forgot himself and began to speak out loud. "So I have a choice, huh? Face all the things that go bump in the night with the lights on, or stand alone in the dark?" Looking around at all the horrors that were once again swarming around him, inextricably drawn like moths to a flame, Gio made a decision. "Well, ignorance is bliss after all," he said as the light faded to black. The darkness took a while to build to the intensity it had been before, and Gio guessed this must be due to the beast swarm thickening until not even a shard of contrast was left. More slowly, and with greater thought, Gio pulled another Turkish delight from his pocket. Ignorance may be bliss, but the nightmares that made the darkness so complete were no longer ignorant of him, so he had to do something. But what? At least Gio could take some comfort in the fact that although he most certainly wasn't alone, he wasn't being attacked either. The nightmares were chattering and clicking to one another, but at least the towering demon was still by his side. He knew this, as he was having trouble breathing, and, this time, it wasn't fear, but the vast demon's breath crashing down upon his chest. If earlier events were anything to go by, these much smaller, albeit very scary, demons weren't about to try anything whilst he was around. With some effort, Gio managed to get his breathing into a rhythm that worked in synergy with the towering demons. This allowed him to think straight and formulate a plan. Perhaps it was not a plan of Newtonian genius or Shakespearean flair, but any plan was better than just standing on the spot. "Well, my eyes are no use to me. Time to be humbled, I think." Clenching his fist, Gio converted the sweet into energy. Bright yellow light shot out in a straight line on either side of his hand, stabbing the dark before slowly fading into a long bamboo stick. Stamping it on the cold cave floor in the hope that this would announce his intentions and make the demon hordes move aside, Gio closed his eyes and started to feel his way around. His senses of touch, sound, and smell were heightened. With his renewed concentration, Gio could hear the hordes scuttle around him, jostling for position. At the same time, it struck him that the towering demon had surprisingly good breath. Using the stick, he prodded in front of him. No, too squidgy. He turned to the left and prodded again. No, too rocky, I think. He turned to the right and struck the ground, and the sound of wood against stone echoed in the darkness. Yes, I think this way, he said assertively. Turning towards the towering demon, Gio called out, "I'm off now. Sorry I couldn't stay for supper." With that, he walked off to the right, swinging his stick from side to side as he went. As he felt his way around the darkness, Gio's senses became increasingly acute. After a while, he got the distinct feeling that he was being followed, even though any noise except for his own was very faint and felt some distance away. Without warning, Gio span around and thrust his stick at chest height in front of him, but could not fully extend his arm. The air he had passed through moments earlier now clearly held something else. Squidgy again, he thought aloud. Gio moved his stick around the squidgy object. Abs? Yes. Big muscular pecs, I see. Large teeth. Gio lowered his stick and called out, not in fear but in disbelief, "Are you that somewhat large demon I saw when the light was on?" The demon grunted, and the pounding, minty fresh breath that Gio had noted before winded him once more. "Are you lost too?" Gio asked. Another grunt came echoing back. Gio folded his arms and stroked his chin, pondering what he should do. "Right, let's consider this. You could be a vast demon here to devour me. If so, why follow me? You could have done the deed by now. Perhaps you can only strike in the light, although you're doing a good job of following me in the dark. It could simply be the rules, I suppose. Of course, you could just do with a hand. I mean, you look absolutely terrifying, but looks can be deceptive. Some people call me fat, when I'm just an Adonis with the bonus of insulation. Geo trod in something wet, filling the room with the same echoing splash that had given him such a fright earlier. Water. That won't do at all, he said, shaking his foot dry. Geo, never one to judge by appearances or stereotypes, realised that he had to be true to himself. His best friend was a terrifying Southgate dweller, and no harm had come to him thus far. Well, at least no harm that Requiem didn't make him forget. If he could stand next to Requiem in the brilliance of the day and meet it head on, then he could do the same here. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, he said as he stuck his stick into the water. A whooshing sound signalled to all around that there was a very large body of water, and it was no longer where it had been. In fact, it was now floating in the air, and a swoosh, a splash, and a thud told Geo that one of the flying demons had been unfortunate enough to find out the hard way. I won't need this any more, he said, staring at the stick he couldn't see before throwing it in the air like a javelin. For a brief moment, the stick could be seen hitting a vast ball of rippling water and turning it into brilliant gold and white light. Once the transformation was over, Geo could see clearly. He was inside a rocky cavern standing next to a now dry lake bed. In front of him was the towering demon he saw earlier. Hiding behind rocks and scattering the walls was all manner of life, each more terrifying in appearance than the next, but none looking as if they intended to eat him. I'm still alive, of which I'm most heartily glad. Geo held out his hand to the towering demon. Hello, I'm Geo of the North Gate. Pleased to make your acquaintance. The towering demon held out his hand and Geo shook his huge finger. Turkish Delight? Geo asked, holding a bag up to the demon. The demon stuck the tip of his finger into the bag and pulled out a sweet on the tip of his piercing claw. Anyone else? Geo offered the bag around the room. The tentative monsters slowly made their way to Geo and grabbed for the Turkish Delight. Upon tasting it, the monsters yelled with appreciation. It was a hellish and most terrifying noise, but Geo was not perturbed. I don't suppose any of you speak English? Geo asked, looking around the sea of monsters emerging from every nook and cranny in the room. A little, the towering demon boomed. As he spoke, wind rushed through the room, and the echo of his voice made Geo wince. This time, though, the other demons did not retreat. A good set of lungs you have on you, I must say. Down to business, then. Do you want to leave this place? Yes, the demon boomed. Any ideas of how to get out? First time we've had light, proclaimed the demon. I see. Now we have light, let's see what we can do. Geo looked around the room. The cavern stretched far above even the towering demon, making the ceiling hard to focus on. But Geo thought he could see a small crack. Does anyone fly here? Geo asked awkwardly, fully knowing that some did, and that their appearance was very much outside of his comfort zone. A chilling shriek came from behind the towering demon, and on his shoulder landed a beast. Part spider, part bat, mostly fangs. Geo gulped. He knew that it was rude to show his fright at the sight of such a thing, but it took all his strength he had not to do so. Could you give me a lift to the top over there? Geo asked, pointing to where he thought the crack was. The fanged beast dropped down to Geo. It was a lot larger than it looked on the demon's shoulder and stood eye to eye with Geo. Admittedly, it had many more than Geo did. With a deep breath and an awkward smile, Geo said, "Okay, I'll just hop on, shall I?" Geo walked to the side of the beast, but couldn't find a way up for legs and wings. Moving to the back was little better, as he was confronted with a large pulsing abdomen. Well, it's more appealing than the front option, he muttered quietly before clambering gingerly onto the beast. Holding on to one of the spikes behind the beast's many eyes, Geo steadied himself and shouted, "Ready when you are, my friend!" The beast gave another chilling shriek. It lowered itself to the ground before springing into the air, knocking the wind out of Kyo, then spiralling surprisingly elegantly to the ceiling. There, Kyo could clearly see a crack, and, beyond it, the welcoming scene of a roaring fire next to a table with a banquet fit for a king. Kyo could easily have scrambled through the gap himself, but the thought didn't even enter his head as he looked down and pondered the situation. How are we going to get everyone through this tiny gap? He said to himself. Patting the beast on its back, he said, Well, first things first, take me down and we'll work on making this gap bigger. The beast dived down to the floor and let Kyo off by the towering demon's feet. Looking around, Kyo could see a large, sharp-looking rock protruding from the ground. It was far too big for him to do anything with, but the towering demon? Now that was a different prospect. Do you think you could tear that rock from the ground and hurl it to that crack in the ceiling? He asked tentatively, pointing to the rock. With a deep chuckle, the towering demon walked over to the stone. Cupping his hands together to make an enormous fist, he smashed the base of the rock. The ground shook as the rock fell, tip first. The demon picked up the rock, leaned back into the javelin pose he had seen Kyo use earlier, and thrust it into the air, giving out a mighty yell that made Kyo's ears ring. The rock hit the crack with pinpoint precision, smashing it into a large opening. Good job, Kyo called, while simultaneously applauding the demon and avoiding debris. Right, gather round, people, he called to the myriad of monsters encircling him. What we need to do is make a pyramid of, people. Towering demon, you'll make the base. Everyone else, you'll crawl over him and make successively higher levels. Flying ones will circle the pyramid and catch anyone that falls. Do we understand? Kyo looked pensively around at the faces that only appeared to be able to hold one expression: terror. He wondered if his words had been too complicated. He need not have worried, however, as the towering demon soon walked up to the wall, put his back to it, and held his arms out wide. The rest of the beasts followed suit and scrambled up the demon's legs and along his arms, making the successive levels that Kyo had asked for. It only took half the demons to make the pyramid. The rest climbed up as Kyo looked on, enjoying the sight of the writhing black mass of monsters making their way to salvation. Once only the monsters of the pyramid remained, Kyo called out to them with his hands cupped around his mouth. You have to hold on to the top level, whilst the lower levels crawl up. Many shadowy muscular arms shot out of the opening and grabbed the top layer of the pyramid. The towering demon nodded to those on his arms, and they made their way up to the opening, followed by the successive levels. It was then that Kyo saw the flaw in his plan. The towering demon was too big for the pyramid to hold him, so he could not get out. And because he had been so concerned with logistics, Kyo had forgotten to climb out himself. It seemed that they were now stuck with one another. As the last flying demon made its way through the opening, he walked up to the towering demon. It's just you and me now, although I don't know what to do, he said somberly, as he patted the demon on the leg. The light was beginning to fade. It looked as though Kyo was about to fail his task and be forever stuck in the darkness with the towering demon. Kyo looked down at the ground and sighed. The sigh soon turned to a pained screech as the towering demon swept Kyo up and threw him into the room. Scrambling back towards the opening, Kyo shouted, "No!" and stared through the gap and watched as the demon was plunged into darkness once more, this time very much on his own. "I'm not having that," Kyo declared defiantly. Striding into the large fireplace without hesitation, Kyo was instantly consumed by flames. Still alight, he strode purposefully towards the opening. Flinging his arms through it, Kyo shot streams of fire into the cavern. The light of the flames highlighted the towering demon's outline. He was sitting on a large rock, no doubt pondering his loneliness. This fleeting glimpse was all Gio needed to turn the fire into ropes and wrap them around the demon. The other monsters in the room needed no direction from Gio. They all grabbed the ropes and heaved the towering demon up. Once the demon was close enough to reach, he dug his claws into the floor and squeezed through the gap. The many smaller demons that had been pulling on ropes fell about themselves, but were quick to get up and scatter as the giant demon tried to make space for himself. It was clear that the room was too small for the towering demon, who sat hunched beside the fire, his arms around his legs, with scores of smaller demons gasping for air as he squashed them. Still glowing red, Gio sympathised. "I know what that's like." Thrusting his hands into the air, Gio used the remaining energy to stretch the room. He made a large chair for the towering demon and all manner of different chairs for the others as he lengthened the table vastly to fit everyone in. When they were all seated, Gio called, "Eat up, my friends, you deserve it." As the demons dived in, the towering demon raised his giant goblet, "To Gio, forever in his debt." The monsters of nightmares raised their goblets and shouted, "Gio!" All sounds to that effect. Gio smiled and ever so slightly blushed under the unanimous praise. At that moment, the word, "Congratulations!" rang through the room, and Gio knew he had passed the test. With a satisfied smile and a well-deserved sigh of relief, Gio tucked into the feast with the rest of his newfound friends. His thoughts now turned to whomever was due to go next. "Good luck," he whispered.